On today's show, the FIBA World Cup is coming up, but is Giannis going to be there? We saw a report that maybe he's carrying a leg injury, so we'll discuss what that means for Giannis and the Bucks, and of course, Team Greece. And we're around 24 hours away from free agency tipping off. We've spent a lot of time talking about Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez, the guys on the team. Are there any names out there that could be of interest that we haven't discussed yet? I've got a few that maybe I want to bring up, but we'll see what Frank's got. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Bucks. My name's Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on this show Monday to Friday, and also find my work over at ESPN. And alongside me, the founder of brewhoop.com and longtime voice of the podcast, Frank Madden, who did make it to Milwaukee. If you've been following along on social media, it's been a rough 36 hours, but Frank is here. We're in the same town. It is unbelievable. And today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. First-time users can receive 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. Now, I always thank everyone for making Locked On Bucks your first watch or first listen of every weekday. We appreciate it. This is a very busy time, and we know people are tuning in to hear what's going on with the Bucks. But Frank, we did a live pod last night, the second one that's ever been around, and I know some people might not care if they weren't there, if they don't live in Milwaukee. I don't know what the estimations say. I'm going to guess it was anywhere between 150 and 200 people that showed up to Broken Bat Brewing Company in Milwaukee on a Wednesday night with the skies covered in smoke, and it is hazardous to be outside. Bango was there. I had a great time, and honestly, I walked away from the night. You got to love Bucks fans, Frank. Everyone had their gear on. I can't believe that many people showed up. So, just to talk about ourselves for a little bit, that was really cool, man.
Yeah, first time that our kind of current roster of Locked On Bucks, with obviously you and Camille, Justin, Eric, and me, were all together in the same place at the same time. I did get all the others, excluding you, together at Rocky Rococo's over Christmas. But we had a Kane Pittman sized hole in the roster at that point, and just we're the hard ones, right? Because we're not local, so the fact that we were both able to get here was really cool just to see each other. But then I think more importantly, I think just having an excuse to kind of bring together Bucks fans under the banner of Locked On Bucks, but really, people that, I've been interacting with, many of whom I've become friends with over many years, people that I've, have known for literally, there's so many people I've gotten to know, after I left Wisconsin, people I didn't go to grade school with, I didn't grow up with, but people I became friends with because I'm a Bucks fan, and because I, first started writing about the Bucks and then started podcasting, and have continued sort of just my addiction of being around this team. So seeing familiar faces was awesome. Shout out to all of our friends that made it out last night, but then also just meeting new people that listen to us for whatever reason, that make us part of their day. I think that was one of the recurring themes is, it's just, there's just so many people, because I'm one of them too, right? Like you love a team like the Bucks, and you want to hear people that at least vaguely know what they're talking about, like talk about the team. And like there's obviously, listen to the national podcast, like there's not, you're not going to hear a whole lot of Bucks talk typically. So it's just really cool just to see that people actually, like listening to us talk about their favorite team. And it's the kind of a privilege, I think, for us that people kind of let us, into their iPads and iPhones and Androids and whatever to listen to us, and hopefully make, I heard a lot of, like people commuting, people doing, random chores, things like that, right? Like podcasts are just a great way to kind of make those things hopefully a little more interesting and enjoyable. So to everyone who we saw last night, thanks for coming out. To everybody who wasn't able to come out but listens to us from near and far, again, just, we always say it, but we just appreciate it. And I think I'll leave it at that. But it was just an awesome night, and we were, before the pod here, Kane and I were just talking, we got to try to figure out how we get both of us back in Milwaukee at the same time again soon. So
in season,
hopefully next year. Yeah, hopefully next year. hopefully the Bucks can, play long enough that we can maybe get together in the playoffs. But if not, regular season, whatever it takes, let's do it again soon. And shout out to Tim and the Broken Bat team. It was very chill how we set this all up. They kind of just let us have the run of the place, and obviously it's I think a fun thing. We bring a bunch of people in. People drink beer, have a great time. It's good for them. It's good for us. They have an awesome space there on the second floor of the private room that we had, and hopefully maybe people saw some pictures that we posted on Twitter. But yeah, it's a very very low key fun. We didn't have to go through a bunch of headaches to plan this. At times I was like, man, I probably should have done a little more prep for this, but in true Locked On Bucks fashion, we kind of play a lot of it by ear. But again, I think people know how we operate at this point, Kane, and we had I think a pretty structured event. I think a pretty structured event. We only had one mic, which prevented me from interrupting you at all times and preventing other people from talking. So I think that was good for the flow of the podcast.
It was, and I had someone come up to me, and we're going to get into the Giannis stuff right now, but I did have someone come up to me and say, you didn't even have your phone on. You didn't even have a plan. It looked like you were just hosting the show. And I said, hey, this is what we do every day. This is how we run this podcast every single day. Now, there's the photo of the big fella, Bango, who made it into proceedings, which was great to see. Drop in the comments where you're from, though, because after the success of last night, Locked On Live, it's going on the road, and we're going to have shows all across cities in the world, and there's going to be 2 people in Locked On Bucks Live in, I don't know, Connecticut or something like that. I don't know. We'll figure it out, but it was a lot of fun. Now, what wasn't fun, though, was to wake up to a news that is insinuating that there is some kind of leg injury with Giannis. This was Basket News that reported that Giannis is doubtful to play at the FIBA World Cup for Greece. I'm still curious that we never heard anything about the wrist or hand injury for Giannis over the last couple of months. That was probably my major concern, but some sort of leg injury. We know he's always sore. We know there's been knee stuff in the past where there might have been some friction between Greece and the Bucks, but basically suggesting that the Bucks don't want Giannis to play in the World Cup if he's not 100% healthy. That seems pretty reasonable to me, but I assume we've got a bunch of listeners that are hoping to see Giannis play in the World Cup that this was disappointing for, Frank.
Yeah, I mean, anytime we talk about Giannis and the Greek team, it's always this kind of back and forth between the perspective of narrow-minded Milwaukee Bucks, what is best for Giannis being a Milwaukee Bucks player, and reaching the lofty goals that they have every year of trying to win a championship. And obviously, yeah, narrowly speaking, if the Bucks could say like, hey, just don't play any competitive basketball in the offseason, like they would love to be able to just wave their wand and have Giannis not play. Alas, it is a negotiation with Giannis. Again, I'm sure they are very careful. They don't want to obviously piss Giannis off about trying to prevent him from playing FIBA basketball, especially given the year-to-year sort of, I think, dance that we're going to be in with Giannis and sort of his future and staying in Milwaukee and all that. So I'm sure the Bucks would strongly prefer that he not play regardless of health. And so what does this leg injury mean? I mean, the funny part is I was scrolling Twitter and it's like, there's a video that he posted of himself like taking off his shoes after a workout, and it's like, so I assume there's some basis in fact of this injury, right? I assume it's not like just some completely concocted thing. We know Giannis can always sort of just point to the right knee soreness thing or left knee soreness thing, right? Because he's had that kind of chronically for years, and that was knee soreness was kind of what caused that initial dust up you referenced years ago between the Bucks and the Greek team. So Giannis is doing his Giannis thing. It's not like we're talking about a Chris Middleton, oh, by the way, just had surgery to clean up his knee, and that's why he hasn't been in public and there's been no pictures of him for the last 6 weeks or something like that. Giannis is obviously not hidden away somewhere. We know he's upright, looking normal. Again, what's he doing in these workouts? We don't know, but he seems like he's been working out as per usual. So if there is something, it does not seem to be a serious injury. It's not like I don't think anybody's assuming that like he had some major leg injury yesterday or something like that. But what it is, I mean, literally it's like leg. All we got is an appendage, Kane. We don't even know if it's his knee,
Body.
ankle, body. Yeah, exactly. In hockey, it's always the like upper body injury or lower body injury because they never want to tell the opponent what's hurt. So yeah, I mean, I think absent more information, I think we just assume that there may be some soreness, something, possibly that knee, and the Bucks probably are encouraging Giannis to take care of his body first all summer and work on his game and do his normal stuff. And if he can find it, in his heart to kind of leave out Greek basketball for a summer, that would be the best thing for him as he prepares for a really important NBA season. But yeah, I guess I wouldn't say no cause for big alarm, but absolutely something worth monitoring, right? If there's something we don't know, hopefully it would come out at some point soon. And I think everybody who loves Giannis, which is probably most of the people that listen to this podcast, I love watching Giannis play basketball. In my ideal world, he's healthy and he plays in the World Cup and he does awesome and helps Greeks win a medal, right? Like I would love that. That would be so fun. I love watching Giannis play for the Greek team. But I also, practically speaking, I'm a Bucks fan first. I don't want him to risk, injury that could impact his play for the Bucks in the regular season or beyond because of what he's doing in the summer. So again, it's the same tough trade-off that we always talk about. But again, I don't want him playing hurt in the World Cup, but hopefully he's healthy and can play. But if there's something that, can excuse him from the World Cup, hey, if you're a narrow thinking Bucks fan, I think that would probably not be a bad thing either.
I'm always torn with this because we also, I mean, you mentioned some of the videos. I think he was taking his shoe off and smelling it or something. I don't know what was going on there, but he's got some new shoes coming out. But anyway, we've all seen Giannis work out. So I'm always torn, and this is always something we talk about. Of course, accidents can happen when you're playing a game of basketball, but is he at more risk? Is there going to be more wear and tear playing in the World Cup than what he's doing on a daily basis anyway? I don't really know, but let us know in the comments how you feel about the news that came out today, whether you're concerned, whether you're desperate for Giannis to play in the World Cup. And if you're a Greek basketball fan, I assume you're desperate for him to play. I would be the same with my Australians that I'm hoping will have a long tournament in the World Cup. But if you're not from Greece, how do you feel about Giannis playing? Because also you've got this NBA season that runs into the Paris Olympics next year as well. So for all the guys that are playing international basketball, it's a really busy period here over the next couple of years, and particularly because the Olympics were delayed going back a couple of years ago. So next we're going to get into free agency, though, because I think this is what everyone's excited about right now, particularly over the course of the next 24 hours. Who are some of the names that maybe the Bucks could bring in new faces, keeping in mind there actually isn't that much room on the roster. So we'll talk about free agency and the Bucks coming up next after we talk about our friends over at Prize Picks, today's show sponsor. If you're not familiar with how Prize Picks works, pick 2 to 6 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. It's just you versus the projections available. So it's if it's in a basketball, a WNBA game, it could be the points over, the rebounds over, the blocks under. You'll be able to get all those projections on Prize Picks. And I mentioned WNBA, but there's also MLB you can get involved with, college sports, whatever's going on in college sports right now, esports, NASCAR, tennis. So endless sports that you can get involved with on Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit 100, they'll give you 100. If you deposit 50, they'll give you 50. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. All right, so tomorrow is the big day. Free agency tips off 6 p.m. Eastern time. So we'll have a podcast at some point because we're expecting there's going to be some Bucks news. Now,
by the way, Kane, did you clarify? I didn't catch the pod yesterday because I was traveling. Did you clarify we did not even record the live podcast? If people are looking for it, we apologize. It just logistically we just opted not to do it. I think it was probably more. It may have been more free flowing. I probably swore a lot more because I knew it wasn't being recorded. But yeah. So obviously, for folks who wanted to be there and would like to listen to it after, apologies. It was kind of a for various reasons which we don't need to get into, we opted not to do it. But again, I for that reason, we will obviously also make sure that some of this discussion I think that we're about to get into, which we talked about yesterday, we'll cover again today, so that people don't feel like they missed out on any killer insight. But yeah, anyway, and I guess just one more reason you got to come next time we do one of these, right? You just if you want to be the completest Locked On Bucks listener, you're gonna have to show up to the live pod to get it all.
It's kind of fun. I'm not sure if it really works last night, if it would have been a good podcast listen anyway. I'm sure people would have listened, but I'm not sure that format really works. But you bring that up.
Plus, it was just us, and it was just us too, right? It wasn't like we had it's not like we had Giannis come on as a guest or something, and people were like, "What did Giannis have?" Whatever. Like, it was just us. It wasn't. We kind of made a point to not do spend a bunch of time on interviews with people, because it was like, whatever. We just want to hang out and have it be chill. So yeah, it is what it is. But again, we'll try to make sure we cover everything that was salient.
Yeah, well, that's why you bring that up, because we did have the question about what players might be on the list that the Bucks that aren't Milwaukee Bucks players, and that's always the fun part of free agency. I think new players, bringing new players to town. So I know you had a list. You mentioned a bunch of guys last night. We can go through them again. There was a tweet overnight, and I just want to throw a name at you to start. There was a tweet that dropped some point last night. I was probably too busy talking or drinking or who knows what I was doing, but a guy that we've at least kicked the tires on before, but that was more from a trade standpoint. Eric Gordon, what do you think the market is for 34-year-old turning 35 Eric Gordon, Frank?
Yeah, and he's coming off having earned, roughly $20 million a year
lot of cash.
for the last few years. I think he's actually a really fascinating option. He wasn't on my list because I had assumed that the Clippers would probably keep him, but obviously with his big cap number, there's a lot of financial upside from a tax perspective for them to have waived him. So I personally would definitely be interested in him. The reason that I think we've previously looked at him as a potential interesting fit is because, again, we're always looking for that shooting guard solution for the playoffs. And, I think we discussed last night, one of the questions that came up was, and we had a couple questions, right? We had questions around kind of what's our opinion of Grayson Allen? Is he the kind of leader in the clubhouse for the starting shooting guard spot? And I thought Justin actually probably made the best point. I like the way he framed it. Is he said, I don't think the Bucks have their starting shooting guard for the playoffs on the roster right now, which, obviously there's a number of guys who are not officially signed yet. Grayson Allen, that's probably mainly a statement about Grayson Allen and whether, he is the answer to being the Bucks starter come playoff time. I made the point as well. I think Grayson Allen's kind of underrated at this point. I feel like there's been almost so much urgency to kind of push him out the door by Bucks fans, which I understand to an extent, right? I think some of the kind of size limitations, physicality limitations we saw more against the Celtics a couple years ago, and I think offensive, I think his biggest problem is he's not a motion shooter. He's, a very good spot up shooter, but doesn't get up tons of threes just because he is a guy that tends to, need to be set to shoot threes. I think Eric Gordon is interesting. He's a guy that I definitely spent some time thinking about, last couple of years as a potential trade target. His cap number always made it really hard because it was really hard to find matching salary to get a guy who was in that $20 million range. And then even if you get the matching salary, then it's okay, so given how expensive this roster is, you're peeling off 20 million of that for Eric Gordon, who, he's an aging player. But I think he's interesting for a couple reasons. I think one, he is a guy that to the detriment of his 3-point percentage at times, he's a guy that will shoot threes from anywhere, right? I mean, he will shoot the 30-foot three. He is not afraid to jack it up from pretty much anywhere on the floor. He's I think a guy though that to me has been most interesting because of kind of the fact that he's historically been a pretty sturdy two-way player. And this is a question where I did not see enough of Eric Gordon in last year's playoffs and regular season to really comment on where his defense is. At his peak when the Rockets were good, I mean, he was a good physical perimeter defender. He's not the tallest guy in the world at 6'4", but or 6'3", 6'4", but he's a big boy, right? I mean, he's listed at 215. He's strong. He's wide. He's, not a guy that you can just sort of like back down easily in the post or something like that. And so I think a guy that, I thought physically, again, is he a better defender than Grayson Allen at this point? I would imagine he's still a more physical defender than Grayson Allen at this point. Is he as good in the regular season? Is he as quick as Grayson Allen is? Maybe not, right? But if you're looking for a guy that has some physicality, I think Eric Gordon, I would speculate that he still has that. And, just again, from like a scoring perspective, he's a guy who, again, he's never going to be a point guard, but he can handle a little bit. He can shoot from wherever. And he's obviously been a guy that has scored at a high rate for a long time. And, looking at his numbers, like, a lot of his sort of rate stats have held up pretty well, even though he's now, I think, going to be entering his age 35 season. So I feel like we've heard suggestions, as you said, of the Bucks being interested in Eric Gordon in recent years. I imagine that, he is a guy that I would fully expect the Bucks to be calling on him and seeing kind of what he wants to do. He's I think, is he from Indiana, I think, or Illinois? He's like a Midwestern guy. So, I don't know. I don't know how much he would be averse to Wisconsin winners or anything like that. But I imagine he would prioritize. I'm sure he wants to win, but I think probably the question, that you were hinting at is, how much does he prioritize getting, a bigger contract with his next deal versus signing for the minimum and chasing a title? I don't know, right? That's probably the main substance of the discussion that, John Horst would have to have with his agent, because again, I think with the Bucks, we talked about it last night. I tweeted about it. There's a pathway the Bucks could use the tax pyramid level exception. It starts with whatever numbers that, hopefully, knock on wood, Chris Middleton and Brooke Lopez agree to at 5:01 Central Time on Friday. That's the hope, obviously, that those guys sign immediately, and then you have a much better view of kind of what type of money you have to work with under the second apron, which again, the tax pyramid level, you have to be at the second apron or under it in order to use that tax pyramid level. And it's only $5 million this year, right? So it's not, last year was 6.4. They've essentially pushed down the tax pyramid level. They've bumped up the room mid level. They bumped up the regular non-tax mid level. So this goes for Eric Gordon. This goes for any of the guys that we might talk about as potential targets. The tax pyramid level isn't like a huge number. It can only be a 2-year deal. So you'd be looking at, 1-year deals or like, maybe a John Horst special 1+1 if a guy is good enough and potentially young enough to take that deal. But I mean, the irony is like some of the minimum contracts, if you're a 10-year vet, the 5-year, the tax pyramid level is not really a whole lot more. I mean, it's maybe like it's under $2 million more than your minimum contract that you would get if you signed a minimum deal. So again, the delta value of that tax pyramid level has gone down, and with it comes, limitations for teams. If you use it, then you are hard capping yourself at the second apron, which will be 182.5 million approximately this year. So again, Bucks can structure their contracts so that they could sign a guy at that level, and they could also, I've been sort of placeholdering, like maybe they re-sign Jay Crowder or Javon Carter for $4 million a year, fill out with minimums otherwise, and then you could use that tax pyramid level and be just under that second apron. But again, you may also opt, hey, I'd rather keep Javon Carter and Jay Crowder and then just not be hard capped, because then I have a lot more flexibility to make trades, bring back more money in deals and things like that. And again, the hard cap is an annoyance, right? It's hard to kind of work around it. We saw a couple of years ago, the Bucks were hard capped, and it just makes everything more difficult from a team building perspective. So yeah, I think Eric Gordon's a very interesting player, especially, if we want to get into some of the other names, especially when you look at the crop of guys that might also be out there.
Yeah, it's hard to believe for me that he might be in that range, and I always kind of just look at it and I'm like, why am I like really interested in this guy? Probably because he's pretty good. And for the Bucks, when they're in this difficult situation when it comes to the financial situation, maybe there is guys like our old friend Dante DiVincenzo, who I mentioned yesterday on the podcast, that I just, first of all, maybe he doesn't want to come back to Milwaukee, but more importantly, I think that the deal is going to be a little bit more than that. So Unfortunately, I don't know whether you brought your best material last night in terms of names you had on the list. It was a little bit underwhelming. But what are some of the names? Maybe we could just rip through a couple and at least put them on the table, because there will be guys and there will be under the radar guys that fans will be interested in. And I know that he got a little bit more money than this, but and I think it was a unique situation. But Bruce Brown, where's the Bruce Brown for the Bucks? I'm just going to keep mentioning that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think if we kind of just go through some of the names, right? Let me start with guys that I think are like could command taxpayer mid-level or potentially more in some cases. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, a guy that I think finally sort of started to figure some things out with the Timberwolves. I think he was starting in the playoffs ultimately. He's an interesting guy, still very young. I thought there was some hope initially that he might be a point guard when he came into the league. He's got good size, but I think he's more of a kind of shooting guard / wing type guy who can handle it a little bit. I mean, I think the Dunked On guys actually had him at potentially getting like $10 million a year to stay in Minnesota. So he's probably out of your budget. But again, who knows? Maybe not, especially given that the Minnesota Timberwolves are going to be paying, like the GDP of Canada to their three centers at this point, with Naz Reid signing in addition to Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns. Like, it's just kind of crazy how much money they're spending. Let me go through some of like some of the younger guys that might be interesting before we get into maybe some of the like older vet type guys, which are more in the like Eric Gordon age range. But so aside from Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Dennis Smith Jr. is interesting to me. Really good defender, obviously former lottery pick, interesting guy. Had kind of a redemption season with the Hornets last year. Again, very good defender, great physical tools. But really has never figured out how to shoot at the NBA level the way people expected when he came into the league. Has been a poor 3-point shooter the last
couple
couple
years. That's what the Bucks are after this year, Frank. That'll work.
I know. We're gonna check. Adrian Griffin's gonna bring in those good defenders who can't shoot 3-pointers. What could go wrong? I think he probably stays in Charlotte, but again, he could be a guy that that signs for something in that taxpayer mid-level range. And again, like I think this is the kind of thing, right? Like, I think if you're the Bucks, you have to think like, is there a guy that we could sign who has upside to be better than he's been? That's again really hard to find these guys. But think about someone like Pat Connaughton, who they got essentially the minimum from Portland years and years ago, and he developed into a top 7 rotation guy on a championship team, right? Like, and that's obviously what we always talk about is like which of these guys could you see becoming a top 7, top 8 guy in a playoff rotation, a guy that plays every series. And that, to me, that's like with minimum guys, I'm fine spending the minimum on guys who are more like regular season guys or guys that have like some flaws that probably prevent them from being high level rotation players in every playoff series. Like, what do you want for a minimum, right? Like, it's just really hard to find. I think for the taxpayer mid-level, I think you at least have to like construct a narrative about that there's at least a chance that guy could be that type of player, because again, you just have very little ammo to sign guys this summer. So again, is Dennis Smith Jr. that guy? I don't know. The shooting may be a problem. Shake Milton, and again, still talking about kind of like combo guard type guys. I've generally felt. I mean, we've obviously watched the Sixers a ton against the Bucks in recent years, and Shake Milton's been there a while. He's now an unrestricted free agent. Again, never kind of like broke through to becoming like a really high level playoff performer, but a guy that can handle it a bit, shoots pretty well, can create shots from the mid range. Again, defensively, I was about to say he's not great, nothing great shakes, pun intended, I guess, but he's not just like I don't think he's a hopeless defender either. So again, Shake Milton, taxpayer mid level. Yeah, maybe that doesn't seem crazy. Other kind of younger guys, RJ Hampton was just waived by the Magic. I think RJ Hampton's probably like reaching that point where it's like, I just don't know that he's ever going to figure it out. A guy, I mean, he plied his trade in the NBL for that season, Kane, right? So I'm sure you have a soft spot for RJ Hampton. Again, has some athleticism. There was hope that he would become a good 3-point shooter, has a little bit of handle, a little bit of ball creation on his side. Just hasn't really happened, right? And has bounced around a fair bit, and obviously now a free agent, probably looking at like a minimum type contract. So again, dice roll, RJ Hampton for the minimum. There are worse ways to spend your money, I think. But he's a guy that do I think he's going to be a top 8 playoff rotation guy? I would be pretty damn shocked if he's a playoff rotation guy for any team. But again, maybe there's something in there and he's still very young. Troy Brown is interesting, 23 years old, went to LA last year, former mid first round pick, good size, good handle, came into the league as like kind of like from Oregon, was like, oh, he's like kind of a weird Swiss Army knife guy. Has shown, I think, 3-point shooting, not necessarily super consistently, but has a bit of a 3-point shot and can defend to a decent extent. And so I think he's an interesting guy as well. Again, you may need more than the minimum. Maybe it is more of that taxpayer mid level. Maybe someone gives him more, but I think Troy Brown is interesting. And then a couple of Bulls players that we obviously have seen a lot of the Bulls these past few years. Javonte Green and Derek Jones Jr. Javonte Green is like 6'4", but seemed to play power forward a ton for the Bulls. He's kind of a weird player, but again, Bruce Brown potential, he's 29, so maybe the Bruce Brown potential is out the window. But I think he's a guy that has been sneaky productive. He's not a guy that is going to shoot a high volume of threes, but is pretty competent from that range and also a pretty competent defender. So again, you can kind of look at him and say like, well, if this guy's good, like why didn't he play more for the Bulls? Fair question. But I think you look at the last couple of years. I don't know. I mean, a guy again that's really efficient inside. I mean, over 60% on 2-point shots, and shot three is 36% and 37%, but on very low volume the last 2 years. So I think if you're talking about who has maybe some of that, like, and he's Bruce Brown's size. He's 6'4", so he's again 6'4", 205. Looks like a shooting guard on paper, but in practicality has plays a lot bigger than that. So I think Javonte Green is interesting. And then Derek Jones Jr., I think everybody knows about, obviously, his incredible athleticism. Again, I think he's a really solid, versatile defender. Doesn't have the size. He's a guy who probably has the offensive skill set of like a 4, given the kind of lack of really consistent 3-point shooting. But, he's 6'5", 210, right? So he's, again, kind of like Green, plays much bigger than his size would suggest. Green's, I think, 29. Derek Jones Jr. is still only 26. But he's a guy that I think has generally been a pretty productive player, can hit the corner 3. And he was at 33% 3-point shooting, really each of the last 2 years. So again, more of a keep you honest type guy. But, again, we talk about how do you inject some athleticism and defense and, a change of pace into a Bucks lineup that I think has, lacked a lot of that outside of Giannis last couple of years. I mean, the guy's nickname is airplane mode for a reason. He's one of the most athletic finishers and explosive guys you're going to find in the league. So I think he's, again, another really interesting player. So if you roll the dice on one of those two Bulls guys, I don't know. I think those guys are both pretty intriguing. So that's kind of the list of the younger guys, and then I'll just quick list out some of the older players. Danny Green's out there, put up good numbers with Cleveland in the regular season, but then his minutes totally tailed off during that disappointing first round playoff exit. Again, it would be weird to me if you signed Danny Green when you could have just signed Wes Matthews. I feel like they're kind of analogs for one another to a large extent right now. But Danny Green's kind of definitely out there. I think it was Sam Amico who, remember, there's the athletic Sam Amick, who's a very respected journalist. Sam Amico throws a lot of crap out there. How much of it is substantive? That's a question mark. I think he mentioned Derrick Rose and Kevin Love as potential Bucks targets. I could see both those guys. I haven't really been talking about big men with the list because I don't know that necessarily they're going to focus on that, and it's a little less interesting position to me. But we know that they've thought about Derrick Rose for quite some time. Again, to me, he's a minimum guy. What does he have left in the tank? I have no idea, given that he basically didn't play last year at all. But I would probably prefer a younger guy. And again, some of Derrick Rose's past stuff, I just find somewhat unsavory. So anyway, Derrick Rose, yes, could be a guy that they have some interest in. And then Kevin Love, I think, really probably only of interest if you're planning to move Bobby Portis. But if you did move Bobby Portis, then I think Kevin Love becomes a pretty intriguing potential replacement, given the 3-point shooting, the passing, the rebounding, and again, not a good defender in the traditional sense, but certainly a guy that I think if you have good defenders around him can, be a reasonable team defender. So anyway, those are some of the names that I've cobbled together. I don't know, Kane, if there were others that we talked about yesterday or anybody else that you'd want to throw out there.
No, I don't think there was anyone from the list that you mentioned last night that we missed. I don't know. I mean, overall, I think a lot of people are going to feel the same way. Some of the veteran guys I'm not as excited about, but the roster spots are kind of minimum, which is why, to me, I'm like, if you could get some of those younger guys you mentioned, and again, like Troy Brown played 70-plus games with the Lakers this year at around 25 minutes a game. I don't know whether he's going to be in that price range, but someone like that is exciting. I think that's someone that fans can actually get behind because there might be some untapped potential there that would come to the surface playing alongside Giannis and maybe Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton and these guys. So I'm more just fascinated to see, again, as we've discussed, which one of Crowder, Carter come back. Ingles not so much, just because we just haven't heard anything. But if those guys come back, Thanasis we haven't even mentioned, because once you get to there, I mentioned it on yesterday's podcast I did solo, but the Bucks have had over the last few years the seeming desire to have an open roster spot as well. And there's a number of reasons why that makes sense. But you might only have room for one guy or two guys at the very, very most. So it's not like those contending teams back in the day where you need to cobble together 6 minimum contracts and see if one or two of them become playable. So, yeah, that's a long list. I'm curious to know what the listeners think about any of those guys, if there are some of those names at the top of your list. But all in all, it might not be a totally action-packed free agency period for the Bucks, Frank. We hope so.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point about the kind of roster math, I mean, if you look at the, call it the 8 guys that we hope by Friday will be official with again, knock on wood, Brooke and Chris being officially returned to the fold. If you add Andre Jackson Jr. will certainly get a roster spot or an NBA contract. Chris Livingston, we talked about it. Like, we were like, I mean, that draft range is typically like 2-way land, but if he got a promise and turned down a bunch of workouts, like, is there an implicit, I'll sign for like a 2-year minimum type deal? Bucks get a lower cap hit, 1.1 million. He gets some guaranteed money that he wouldn't otherwise have with just a 2-way. Again, I'm sort of placeholdering that in my my cap spreadsheet. So if that's the case, right, then you're at 10 guys. So you've got 5 roster spots left, and you've got, again, Javon, Thanasis, Joe Ingles, Wes, Jay Crowder, AJ Green, right? That's 6 guys. So you can't bring back all those guys if you do, what I discussed for the first 10. Again, you could argue, well, Chris Livingston, does he get a 2-way spot? And, AJ Green gets a real roster spot or something, or, you could bring back AJ Green on a 2-way potentially. They did make a qualifying offer for AJ Green, which all that means is basically that it's like a 2-way qualifying offer. It's not a qualifying offer for an NBA contract. So we'll see what they do. Obviously with him, we've talked a little bit about, does he fit the mold of what Adrian Griffin and sort of the new-ish regime, the new/old regime is interested in. But yeah, I mean, again, even to the extent like you want to run it back, I mean, they can't fully run it back. And I think in a general sense, like I think you should every year try to bring some fresh blood in here. See if, if it's not a proven veteran type guy, then at least go and see if you can maybe identify, like, if not the next, Bruce Brown, like, can you find the next Bobby Portis? The Bucks have had their own success with some of these guys too. So, or Brooke Lopez for that matter, right? So we'll see kind of what the Bucks do, but yeah, the roster spots fill up pretty quickly. And so to the extent that you want to see all these guys brought back, I mean, they're going to have to make some oxygen choices, I think. And, some of these guys that maybe fans liked and, to varying extents, guys that had really kind of useful roles last regular season. Some of those guys certainly may not return. And, hey, I tell you what, Kane, I'm all about Joe Ingles on a minimum salary. So I'm with you on that one, buddy. We had some moments in the live pod last night where we had to confront the reality of potentially Joe Ingles not returning, but we will see. We'll see how soon we get an answer on it. But I don't think Joe's going to sign at 501 Central Time like he did a year ago for any team. But who knows? Maybe there still is a some angle for him to come back to Milwaukee, which again, for a minimum, I'd happily take him back.
Well, it's going to come around very quickly, and as I mentioned, we will have a podcast sometime tomorrow night when there's news that drops, and we'll have the latest obviously here, and we'll try and break it all down for everyone. So let us know from today's show, though, the Giannis stuff when it comes to the World Cup and his availability there, and then the list that we just went through, whether it's younger guys, older guys, and just how many roster new guys you want to bring onto this roster with the situation the Bucks are in. So let us know all your thoughts, and also if you came to the live pod, let us know. Drop a comment, and make sure you follow, subscribe, and do all that stuff. Frank, I'm going to get this pod up there because I've got about, what are we talking? Under 24 hours left for me in the state of Wisconsin as well. So we're going to go out while you're here. We're going to get some food. You showed up to the live pod last night with the biggest bag of Rockies. It was falling apart. It was bursting at the seams. There was sauce dripping out the bottom, but you had a big smile on your face, which is what we love to see.
I mean, it had to be on brand. I lost my luggage, thanks United Airlines. And so I literally grabbed a Bucks shirt from my dad's drawer, like the only passable one that I could find. And then I drove to Bayshore on the way downtown, got some, went into Kohl's, got some clean underwear, got some socks. I had a pair of shorts, and I had that shirt. And what else would I do? Of course, gotta stop by Rockies. Gotta load up on some slices to share with my friends at the live pod. So I feel like people would expect nothing less than me showing up at a live podcast with a bunch of Rockies and a Rockies cup. So gotta give the people what they want, Kane.
Yeah, totally agree. And that'll do it for today, though. We've done a lot of talking over the last 24 hours, so we'll wrap this up here. As I said, let us know your thoughts. And then at some point tomorrow, after free agency tips off at 6 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Central Time, we'll have a podcast to wrap up the first day of free agency and roll right through the weekend. So we appreciate the support on Locked On Bucks, and we'll catch you all tomorrow.